And the Serin centers are integrative neuropsychology and therapy centers. We do testing for gifted, IEP testing. We do general therapy for anxiety. I specialized in treating gifted kids for years. And I've been actually doing this conference for about 6 years. Come on in, you're all good. And we, for those of you, I know, I've been out in, for those of you who know me, we've been out in like Northwest Peoria forever, right? But I'm happy to say that we now have 4 clinics. So we're also now in Glendale, Scottsdale, and Tempe. And I actually am personally in Scottsdale now 1 day a week, and I'll be expanding to 2 days a week at our Raintree and 101 location. So for those of you who always maybe wanted to come see me, but I was too far away, I'm coming hopefully closer to you. And we'll talk a little bit throughout the presentation of some of the things that we can do to help your gifted kids. I know none of your gifted children need any help, but just in case in the future they do, I'm just kidding, then we'll go ahead and help you. All right, come on in everybody. There's more seats. We actually had more brought in. And yeah, don't be afraid, you're not interrupting. For those of you who just walked in, these index cards here are for you to write down your questions. So you can write down specific questions about your kids. And for the ones I don't get to by the end of the presentation, I'm happy to stay and chat with you for a few minutes after. All right, 10 things to never say to your gifted child. Who has ever said something to their gifted kid that they wish they had not have said? Yes, okay. Mine mainly is the wrong answer because I didn't calculate something right and my kid corrects me, but there's also some other things. So, number 1, so we're just gonna get right into it, okay? And there's more than 10 things, by the way, and your children will let you know what those are, right, as soon as you say them. They'll also let their teachers know what they shouldn't have said and all of those lovely things. But here's the first one. This should be more perfect, okay? And I've bolded 2 things here. First of all, this image is of a man kind of pushing against a brick wall. And should is a very, very dirty word, okay? Whenever you hear should come out of your mouth or someone's mouth, what you want to understand is that this is what's happening. You're butting heads with the universe. Should means that something's not happening that you want to be happening. And instead of dealing with that, the real thing, should is a dirty word, okay? And so when you're talking to your children about what should be happening and it's not happening, what you're really doing is you're kind of actively resisting, right? And there's a lot of situations with gifted kids that we think about this. You know, you should be more patient. You shouldn't be this intense. You know, you should. And so just want to notice when that's your tendency. And what we want to do is we always want to be handling what's really right in front of us. Okay, so forget should. What really is happening and how can we help in that situation? And then perfect is up here, because generally, gifted kids actually have difficulties with perfectionism. Not all of them, okay? And guess what? I love when I ask gifted parents, like, so your kids are gifted, so are you? And they're like, no, we're not gifted. It is very, very genetic. So even if you weren't identified as a kid because they weren't doing that as much, many parents of gifted children are also gifted and also have genetic gene variants that make their brains more efficient and able to process a lot of information, but they also can be quite intense and anxious. And so if you have your own perfectionism and your child is also a perfectionist, that is kind of a recipe for a lot of anxiety kind of building on itself, okay? So you want to watch the shoulds and you want to watch the perfectionism, and that's my first recommendation to you, okay? The other thing about doing the shoulds and the perfectionism is that gifted kids tend to have intensities and overexcitabilities, okay? And these are Dabrowski's theory that gifted children have a lot of developmental potential. It exceeds that of individuals of average intelligence, but they can have these intensities, okay? Intellectual intensities, constant curiosity, the need to be precise and perfect and right with all of these things. Emotional intensities. Has anybody ever dealt with that with your gifted child? Probably not, okay, just kidding. Gifted kids can really go from 0 to 100 very, very quickly in terms of getting very frustrated. And I see that almost every day with my 8-year-old, and learning how to calm. Your first job, if they have the emotional intensity, by the way, is to calm down their nervous system. And I will be talking to you today about some ways to do that are very, very easy. Loved the keynote this morning, and she had a beautiful example of her child really struggling with intense anxieties about public speaking. And some of you saw that we have a TouchPoint booth. I wish he had had those TouchPoints, because toning down nervous system reactivity in real time can actually prevent reoccurring emotional intensities and these situations where your kids are kind of worked up, right? Because here's how your fear system works. Once you get worked up about something in a situation, your fear system's supposed to lock into it and get continual worked up, and your brain learns to avoid what's unpleasant, okay? So if you have gifted intensities and you are projecting those onto your kid, like homework, for example, okay, then that is going to build on itself, and you may be creating a child who's going to want to avoid that. I am not immune to this, by the way. My son was taking a chess class when he was 5, okay? And I was literally sitting there, and he made a move, and I was like, really? Really? Do you want to make that move, Christopher? Because think about it. You didn't look at the rook. Do you see the rook? Whatever. And I'm actually hovering over my 5-year-old, you guys, my 5-year-old. And I just took a pause, and I was like, what am I doing? I was such a tiger parent in that moment. And I looked at the instructor sheepishly, and I'm like, I'm just going to go in the corner and sit down and to like push myself in the back of the corner, because I could not help myself but like hover and stress out about what chess moves he was making when he was 5. Does it matter? No. But for some reason, my brain was really attached to that. And I think some of us all have these things that we're really worried about. If this isn't right now, there's all these things in the future that may go wrong, right? Gifted brains tend to be very good at predicting and catastrophizing. And if you have that tendency, I would like to help you with that, because that is going to translate to your children having some more emotional intensities. And did you have a question?
So I was wondering if you were going to email the slides.
Oh, the question is, am I going to email the slides? Thank you so much, because I didn't pass this out yet. I will pass out these sign-up sheets, and if you want to put your contact information on, we'll email the slides after the presentation, okay? So you can pass these around, and I'll thank you so much. Can you reach this, honey? There you go. Got it. Okay. All right. Imaginational overexcitabilities. Gifted children can be very, very creative and just get into their heads and imagine all these things and do all this stuff. And if you don't have that excitability, you want to make sure that you're not totally discouraging that, okay? And here's where it's interesting. Gifted parents with overexcitabilities and gifted kids, if they don't match up, be careful with that. And honor and respect your children for not maybe matching that up. Where I see that a lot is actually in parents that are super organized and they have great executive functions and they're very organized, and their children, gifted children, often have worse executive function, as I'll explain why that is, okay? And it's just really, really frustrating and upsetting for the parent, and they think, again, back to the number one, this should be more perfect, right? You should be more organized, you should this. Well, it just doesn't kind of work that way. So really be mindful of when your tendencies and overexcitabilities or your organizational structure, how you run your life, when that's incongruent with how your kids are, be gentle with yourself and with them about it. All right, we've got psychomotor overexcitabilities. That looks like this. These are the kids that are so excited when these are their chairs instead of the ones that they can't move. Right? They're constantly moving. And then what happens when you take them to the doctors? What do they tell you? What do they have? ADHD. Are they unfocused? Not necessarily. Now, there are some gifted children that have ADHD, okay? There are a lot of gifted children with psychomotor overexcitabilities that pay attention just fine. They just need to move, okay? And so that's another one. And then sensual overexcitabilities, really aesthetic, sensual, artistic, those kinds of overexcitabilities can be there as well, okay? All right, number 2, you're so smart. You should be able to blank, blank, blank. That violates number 1, right, because should in there. But also, are you sure? They should be able to do something. First of all, you're butting heads with the universe because they can't, or they're not doing it right now. And second of all, there's a lot of demands that we have on our kids that are not developmentally appropriate. Case in point, the current educational system. Why are our 5-year-olds getting worksheeted to death? I don't know. It's not developmentally appropriate. And I have people coming into my clinic saying, there's something wrong with my kid. What's wrong with your kid? He doesn't want to do his worksheets. Birthday's in August. Turned 5 like the week before school started. There is nothing developmentally inappropriate about that. I don't want to do worksheets, and I'm 43, okay? And I get distracted, and it's all okay. But notice the schools keep upping the organizational and the executive function requirements, but your kids' brains aren't developing any faster, okay? So when you've got a school that, for example, has 5 minutes in between classes and no bells or structure or anything like that, and your 5th grader is in there, I wouldn't expect that 5th grader to be able to manage all of that and manage all of the teachers and manage all of the homework and do all of that. So don't assume just because the school thinks your kids should do it that your kids should be able to do it, okay? And also, a lot of times smarter kids have poor executive functions, okay? Remember the flush the toilet? I mean, I just put that on there because I've got an 8 and a 10-year-old kid, boys, and they're like twice exceptional, both of them. Come on, right? But they really, one of my kids is like Pigpen, right? There's always this cloud of dust around him, and his executive functions are terrible. And my 8-year-old comes out every morning like, ta-da, and he's fully dressed, and he's like, I brushed my teeth, and it goes ding on his teeth, and everything's wonderful, right? My 10-year-old, I'm not going to beat him up. His brain is different. And when I look at his EEG with this fancy thing right here, this actually can read 80% of the brain's pyramidal cell activity, and we can do it on an outpatient basis. And we've got such cool stuff now, you guys, okay? Really, really cool stuff. But when I look at the EEG, I go, okay. And I know as a neuropsychologist, he shouldn't be able to do it, and here's why in his brain, right? But as parents, if it's not happening, even if you don't understand why, you start with where they're at and you try to help them through it. And by the way, don't beat yourself up trying to do things that they're not developmentally appropriate for. Sometimes you'll catastrophize and think, if I don't get this now, he's gonna, if he doesn't pick up his shoes now, he's gonna be an 18-year-old and like live in a slovenly place and blah, blah, blah. Don't do that to yourselves, okay? Most of you have plenty of time. And if you have the right help and consulting, and we've got some really cool stuff now that can help with a lot of these things, I probably can take a lot off your worry plate and make your parenting jobs a lot easier, okay? Go ahead and advance, thanks. All right, this is why your kids might have worse executive functions. This is a study of cortical thickness, okay, here, and then this is age here. And so the blue is the cortical thickness of kids with superior intelligence. In this study, I believe the IQ is 122 or above. The red is average intelligence, and the green is high intelligence. Look at these high intelligence kids. Look at these 117s and 118s. They're just like, my notes are color-coded, everything's beautiful, my room is clean, my bed is made. And then your smarter kids here are like, I don't know where anything is. I don't know. Where'd you put that? What? I don't know. I have no clue. Okay, it's like unbaking a cake every time you try to deconstruct stuff. I have the same issue, so between me and my 10-year-old, it's kind of funny in my house. They kind of catch up here, but look at what age? 12. And by 12, what are they doing? They've had years. It used to be 12, they started junior high and started switching classes, right? When do they switch classes now? 5th grade, 3rd grade, it's crazy. I mean, I get pull out for gifted and everything, but I mean like managing all of that, when here's where their curve is in terms of cortical thickness and everything, it's really, okay, it's not ideal. So sometimes you can teach these executive skills later on, but your child has already been demoralized for years with the lack of structure and the expectations that they should be like everybody else if they have executive functioning difficulties. Okay, there's fixes for this. I have some fixes for you, okay? And I'll probably give my executive function talk next time. But this explains, when you're thinking in terms of should, my gifted child should have worse executive functions. My gifted child should be more emotionally intense, socially confused, anxious, and may struggle if they see a homeless person on the side of the street and they cannot stop thinking about the fact that there's injustice in the world and they're 6. Okay? Those are actually the shoulds. Okay? Go ahead, Rachel. Thanks. All right. So I talked about some of this, so we'll go to the next slide. And there's neurocorrelates of intelligence. Did you know this? You know the COGAT, by the way, that your kids all take? That's only a correlational test. It's not a real IQ test, okay? I can get the same IQ reading from an EEG now with the same correlation in about 10 minutes that I can from the COGAT. Now, the schools won't take it, so they'll make you pay to come to me for private testing if your kid doesn't get the COGAT. But by the way, if your kid only scores okay, not only, but 90%, 92%, 95% on the COGAT, it doesn't mean they aren't gifted. Okay, there's a lot of false negatives. The COGAT is designed to only identify kids that are highly gifted, and it leaves some out. So if you've got siblings and one of them almost made it but didn't, and you really want to put your kid in a special school, or your other child in a special school or something like that, you really want to get private testing and make sure that they don't make cutoff, because a lot of times we're missing the gifted kids, okay, especially when they're in the same family. So there's neurocorrelates, have to do with the posterior parietal cortex. If you want to have a nerdy offline conversation, we can do that after. Rachel, you can go to the next one. There's also gifted norms. And the third thing I don't want you to say is, with the siblings, you aren't gifted like your brother because you didn't pass, didn't get that score on the COGAT. Okay, this happens all the time. There's so many reasons to not score high on the COGAT. And when we test these kids privately, their IQs are higher. And by the way, this is verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning. So this is verbal abstract reasoning, and this is kind of like visual and spatial abstract reasoning. And these are the norms. So these are the average gifted kids. And do you notice they're not 98, 99, 100? It's because most gifted kids actually are not gifted in both things. So you also want to move away from a unitary construct of giftedness and think just because you're smart, you should be smart with everything. The statistics are that if you're gifted in verbally, you're more likely to not be gifted non-verbally than you are to also be gifted non-verbally. Okay? So if you don't have these scores broken down, you may be getting frustrated with your child if they're not doing well in a subject or something, just using that unitary construct. And I want you to think of things, because the other constructs are working memory and processing speed. The average working memory for a gifted kid is 79th percentile. Just because they're smart doesn't mean they can hold on to a lot of things at once in their mind. And working memory is mental control and manipulation. So I'm going to say some numbers, and I want you to say them backwards. So if I say 1, 3, you say? 3. Good. 4, 7, 9, 2. 2, 9, 7, 6, 1, 4, 2, 8. 8, 2, 4, 1, 6. You all did worse on that than you would have one-on-one, because there's an anxiety component of other people hearing you. And anxiety will tank your working memory, okay? And this is really important when we're going to talk about like using touch points and everything, because your ability to process and manipulate information is dependent on how much anxiety you're experiencing in the moment, okay? And your kids, when I get a kid who's gifted but their working memory is lower than this, they actually can't harness their abstract reasoning ability. Because think of what you just had to do digits backwards. And that's part of an IQ test, by the way, is you needed to did you take a picture in your head? Did you kind of picture them? And then you pluck them off, sort of? That's called your visual spatial sketch pad. And what that is just sort of this visual representation of what's happening. And to manipulate it, you have to visualize it and pull it off. If you can't do that, if it fades, it's the etch-a-sketch effect is too fast, then you're going to be an inefficient learner. And when I get kids who struggle academically, the very first thing I look at is working memory. And if that's not almost in line with this, we have got to remediate that. And the way we remediate that is 2 ways. Number 1, with neurofeedback, and number 2, with CogMed working memory training. And if a kid is anxious, I fix their anxiety. Okay? Processing speed is how quickly someone can process information. And again, that's just high average here is the average of gifted kids. So just because they're gifted doesn't mean they're fast. Okay? All right. EEGs and intelligence. Super cool. I just talked about that. We can now read 80% of the brain's pyramidal cell activity on an outpatient basis. And what we do with that is we can correlate it to intelligence. But since the schools don't take it, I wouldn't recommend doing it just for that. Really why we do this is because we can map the brain out and tell where we might need to stabilize some electrical activity to enhance people's performance or treat things like ADHD without medication and other things. That can be done now. And by the way, 3 years ago, if somebody said, hey, what can you do to raise people's IQ? I could say, well, if they're anxious, I could probably get their working memory scores up, or I could train working memory. But now with neurofeedback, we actually can raise IQ. Don't be obsessed with that. If your kid's 150 and you want them to be 152, it's not worth it. But I'm just letting you know, okay?
So for adults too, the ADHD and
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Okay, number 4. I guess we're just going to have to wait till you grow out of it. There was a trend for a while here in the Valley and other areas where if your child was gifted and they were having a problem, doctors would tell you, well, it's because they're gifted. So, okay, just wait it out. And I'm like, hold up, there's still some things that we need to be helping somebody with, right? There's still difficulties here. Don't just say, oh, it's for a good cause, so these aren't problems. These are problems, and we can fix them. Now, we don't get invasive. We don't put your gifted child on medication just because they have psychomotor excitability. But I have to give that kid, I can help that kid's brain stabilize and regulate, and also then give some parenting strategies on the back end of that, and get that to be better. And by the way, I don't start with parenting strategies and I don't start with coping. Don't come to my office and say my goal is that I want to cope with something. I want to get rid of it and fix it and make your parenting job a lot easier. And like the keynote speaker this morning saying everything she painstakingly went through to get her son to tolerate public speaking. If she had come to me in the office and said, this is my child's phobia, this is my problem, we would have nipped that in the bud in probably 3 to 6 sessions, and she wouldn't have had to go through all of the pain and the parenting and her sitting there going into fight or flight watching this, and it wouldn't have been such an ordeal. We can nip things in the bud now, and part of me today is telling you what's possible, because a lot of you haven't been given that message. The medical model now is really in tune to chronicity, right? There's these things, I have anxiety, I own it, it's part of me, it's just the way things are. No. Yeah, or take a pill, right? No, I mean, look, I'm not against medication when it's necessary, but when we go through our treatment plans, we look at the most cost-effective, non-invasive, high-impact treatments, and we start there, and then we work up. And I also then don't do things that I know aren't going to be effective. I tell people that treating someone is kind of like being in a boat, right? And there's too much water in it, and it's sinking. Okay, and we've got buckets, right? And if there's holes in the boat, that's a different approach than if water just filled in from the top and there are no holes. But if there's holes in the boat, I'm not just going to use buckets forever, okay? Because we're not going to get anywhere. And is anybody in here an OT? Okay, good, because I don't want to offend anybody. But I see a lot of that with occupational therapy, where a kid's got a handwriting difficulty, and they go to OT and OT and OT and OT. And when I ask parents, okay, how long have you been in OT? 18 months. Is it working? The response I get 90% of the time is, I don't know. If you're in a treatment for 18 months and you don't know if it's working, stop that treatment and do something else with high impact. And by the way, I don't really care about handwriting. You want a kid to have better handwriting? We can actually, if they really need a stimulant can actually improve handwriting more than 18 months of OT in a day, okay? But that's not our first line. But neurofeedback and some other things, but don't also do treatments, even if they're non-invasive, that aren't high impact. There's enough high impact things that really can make a difference. I also don't want your kids in therapy for 2 years and you to come to me and say, he really likes his therapist and now he can express his feelings. 2 years! And I get that all the time. That is a waste of time. Therapists are great. There are a lot of amazing therapists in the Valley that are doing transformational work. If you're investing in therapy, if you're investing in neurofeedback, if you're investing in anything, you should be seeing a huge impact. And if you're not, then don't let cognitive dissonance play into this. Do you know what cognitive dissonance is? Okay? The study on cognitive dissonance is I have you come in and I make you do something really, really boring. And then I say, you know what, thank you for participating, here's $1. And then I have another guy come in and do the same boring thing and I said, thank you for participating, here's your $20. And then I asked them how terrible was the task. The guy who got $20 says, that was terrible, but at least I got $20. The guy who got the $1 said, it wasn't so bad. That's cognitive dissonance. I'm a schmuck if I did that boring long task and I only got $1 for it. And I'm a schmuck if I spent 2 years in therapy and $5,000 and it really didn't work. But so don't underestimate cognitive dissonance in your own brain, but these therapies that you're doing and the things you're doing should have very, very high impact. And they should be done in the right order. If you have a kid with a learning disability and ADHD, don't spend $15,000 on a reading program if the ADHD isn't remediated. Do neurofeedback first, and if they need medication, put them on medication first, and then you do the reading program. And by the way, those programs don't need to be $15,000. Okay? I know they are, but they don't need to be. Okay, next slide. All right. Here's some brainwave stuff. Isn't this cool? You've got slow waves, delta, theta, alpha, beta, and then all the way to fast waves, gamma. And the reason why I'm telling you about brainwaves is because I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that we're doing. and some of the cool things we can do. So see this? I can take this, and in 10 minutes, I can get this of your child's brain or your brain. Okay? This is 2.5 centimeters off fMRI imaging on an outpatient basis. That's how cool this stuff is now. I can get Loretta images, and this is just one slide. I get 40 slides of this, and I can actually pinpoint excess activity in every wavelength and almost every Brodmann area of the brain. And if you go to the next slide,
Using what medium?
quantitative electroencephalogram. It's just reading activity. It's not invasive, and it's not an fMRI. Okay? And then what I can do, and this is actually my son in my kitchen. Okay? We put this back on, so we're getting a live EEG the whole time, and we use operant conditioning to stabilize certain pathways. This is my pigpen kid, by the way, and guess what we're doing? Cingulate, because he gets stuck on stuff, and then he's not mindful, and a cingulate is part of his limbic system. It's your all-done switch, and it's your gear shifter. And gifted kids have a problem gear shifting, don't they? They stay stuck, and they can't move, or they're on to the next thing too fast, or they're too internally focused, and they ruminate, or it's what if, what if, what if, what if. Okay, and all the contingencies, and and it's not or, it's both and whatever else. Okay, so this is my director, and we can do this in the 4 locations that we have, but we also can do it in home because the dry caps are actually portable now. That's new technology. Okay, so this is an example of someone that starts. You don't know what EEGs look like probably, but this is a start, and this is after 20 sessions. That's brainwave changes, and we can look at it a different way, okay? And these are all the areas in the brain. So here's 11, 10, 8, 9, all these areas, right and left hemisphere. And we want everything to be in here, okay? Because this is regulated. These are based on z-scores and standard deviations. We want everything to be between 0 and 1 standard deviation in terms of electrical activity. If there's too much, and this kid had way too much slow wave activity, delta and theta. So ruminating, can't pay attention, internally focused, sleep problems, feeling sleepy during the day. And then what we get is we also get these brain maps. Some of you may have seen these because these are what are commonly done even without the newer equipment, where you just see tons and tons of delta and theta activity. And this is the internal communication. Can you imagine if you were in a company and anytime you needed something done, you had to make 20 phone calls to do it? That's what this kid's brain was like. It's called hypercoherence, where all these areas are talking way, way, way too much to each other, and not getting a lot done. They're over-communicating for a very, very small result, and then see how here these are wiped out except for a couple of blue. We actually made his brain, regulated the internal activity, brought the electrical activity into stability, and then his brain was communicating much better. Okay. Positive changes in this particular child. This child was actually twice exceptional, 14-year-old gifted child with Asperger's. Better focus, better theory of mind. We had to stop neurofeedback in the middle because he started having empathy. And then he was distressed by it because he had never had it before. So we had to stop it and do a therapy called EMDR so that he could actually process what it was like to have empathy for the first time. And also his mom was sort of like spent with him and kind of sarcastic, and he was really angry at her because he could detect sarcasm. So we had to stop that, pause it, do that. Less internally focused, more appropriate discourse, better reciprocal relationship, and way less obsessive. Those were some of the outcomes just from the neurofeedback. Also, a little fact here is interesting because people always ask me, well, why are my kids so smart? Like, what's the difference? It's a gray matter issue in the brain. And it also seems to be the length of the neurons. Gifted individuals have longer tracts of neurons, which is why sometimes their brains are a little bit less efficient as they're developing, but then later on they're really, really cool and they can do amazing things. Okay. All right, number 5, relax, calm down. Let's talk about your nervous systems, okay? And when you have a kid that's dysregulated and you match that dysregulation with more dysregulation, what happens? Does it get better? No, okay. When your kids, and even if you have kids that are not gifted, okay, any child that is in nervous system reactivity, okay, you can't calm that down in the ways you've been trying to calm it down. You can't match them with dysregulation and expect it to calm down. Okay, that exacerbates it more. You cannot talk to them when they're dysregulated, okay, because they can't hear you. The whole point of sympathetic activation, you've got 2 nervous systems, sympathetic and parasympathetic in terms of this, And parasympathetic is rest and digest, calm, empathic. Sympathetic is stress and fight or flight. And the minute your brain, and your brain does this in hundreds of milliseconds, can start putting you into the sympathetic continuum, your thinking brain starts to shut down. And you become on that continuum more and more of just a reactive being. Now, your kids don't have frontal lobes totally developed. So when they're even a little bit in sympathetic arousal, they're not reasonable. So if anybody's a teacher in here, don't talk to those kids and try to get them to calm down. You need a physiological hack. And so I will show you that. Can you fire up the touch points? Okay. And you can go, oh, I went back. Yeah, go forward. Okay, this is what I was talking about too, the parasympathetic and sympathetic. And your brain's always deciding. You've got a network called the salience network, and it's integrating all the sensory information from the environment and deciding what you should be paying attention to and what it should do with your nervous system reactivity. So we've got physiological hacks that can make your parenting job a lot easier. Now, you did touch points earlier, right? So she did them earlier, and you were having a hard time getting stressed out, which is fine. Normally, people can just think of one thing and they're in, hyperarousal. But then you came in this afternoon and you're like, oh, something had just stressed you out. You're like, where are those things? And I had them in my hands because this is how I prep for a talk. I can't just not have adrenaline before I give a talk like this, so I put these on and they actively calm me down. And this is what I developed for my own, based on EMDR therapy and for my own gifted kids, because I really needed some parenting help. So who wants to play today? Does anybody want to come up? Okay, come on up. And you can go to the next slide, Rachel. Okay. And you can go to the next one too, if you want. Okay. So this is an example of a little girl with them on, so you can wear them on wristbands and everything. Thanks. Okay, and go to the next one. I forget what the next one is. Okay. We'll watch the YouTube video in a second. What's your name?
Kathy.
Okay, this is Kathy, everybody. And just coming up here is nerve-wracking, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't even need to get Kathy activated, because normally I say think of something stressful, but when you're in front of all these people, you're just stressed out, right? So 0 to 10, how stressful is it to just be standing here right now?
8.
Okay, 8. And how does that feel in your body? Because usually when you're stressed out, you have a somatic reaction to it. You have your touch points?
I wasn't going to interrupt you, but I don't know if anybody saw him crying in the corner and couldn't catch his breath.
Can you stand up so they can hear you?
Yeah.
And what's your name, buddy?
Ashbrook.
Hi, Ashbrook. Go
So
ahead.
my son, extremely gifted, and has severe anxiety. He can walk into a room, be just fine, and then all of a sudden just go into this
Fight or flight.
There's no pulling him out of it. It doesn't matter what I say, how I make him breathe. Sometimes we do different things to try to pull him out. He won't come out of it. So he wouldn't go in the classroom, wouldn't, we've been struggling with it all day long. Passed by that little booth that's down there, and he picked them up. He's 7 years old. He's never sat this quiet in his entire life. Ever. His whole life.
Can I hug you? Thank you. That just made my whole day. Okay, wait. Am I paying you?
No.
Okay. I promise this is just as much of a surprise to you as it is to me. And thank you so much. You just made my whole day. I'm sorry. I'm going to get a little.
I know.
Um,
And he said, Mom, I feel so calm.
yeah.
Wow, how are these doing this? How are these, clip them on me? So we bought 2.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm so glad you have those now. How do you feel?
Calm.
Calm. Isn't that a good feeling? It's a really good feeling, isn't it?
Although these will not buzz.
Well, those aren't on right now because you got to get an.
You turned them off.
Yeah.
You turned them off.
But
so
when I
that they
took
won't-
it back on, it didn't buzz.
Well,
Oh, yeah,
you
you-
do it from your smartphone.
Yeah. So these ones, we have a new version that's coming out that's not controlled by an app, but these ones are controlled by the app. So your mom can do it from the app.
The buttons.
There's 2 kinds. The ones with the cool colors, there's cool color ones. Those are a little different, but she can turn them on in a little bit. But you're already calm, man. You don't need these anymore. And poor it's Kathy, right? Yeah. Poor Kathy's been standing up here as an 8. Are you a 10 now?
Yeah, but I was
Okay.
thinking about my daughter when she was speaking, and I was thinking about, for me it's harder because she doesn't outwardly express she more internalizes it. I pick up on it,
Yeah.
but not everybody does.
Right, and so
You know what I mean?
you can be in fight or flight and no one will know. There's people that seem like they're cool as cucumbers and they're not, right? But so you're an 8, right, still?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
and where do you feel it in your body? And
Kind of like right in here.
okay, so I'm going to have you hold these, okay, and you're just going to stand there for a little bit. Now, you don't have to keep thinking about it. And here's where I want you, I'm going to just turn what you think about stress on its head, okay? You don't have to stop what you're doing and do something in order to de-stress, okay? Your brain will do it for you, and this can help it make a decision to go into the parasympathetic activation and that calm system, which is what you're doing right now, and you're doing so great. And I think I shared 2 twice exceptional children, ages 8 and 10. And one of the reasons why I developed these is because I did not have the help that you all are seeking, and we need better solutions. And so these gifted kids need something. And when I figured out what this was doing in the brain, I pulled this from EMDR therapy, actually, which is a superior therapy to talk therapy because of the somatic components. And one of my old professors is Tiffany Field from the Touch Research Institute in Miami. So I had the privilege in my graduate program to understand how powerful the somatosensory cortex is in regulating nervous system reactivity. And so when I found this out, I didn't think it was fair to keep it confined to therapy offices anymore. And so I partnered with our CEO of our company to give access to everybody, because the world is a better place, isn't it? Already for you today. Okay, let's play the video. This video just posted on Huffington Post yesterday, and you're all kind of on the ground floor of this. We're in Inc. magazine this week. We'll be in Time magazine next week. And it all started here in Arizona. And by the way, it's from AAGT, because that's where I met Vicki, who became my friend 6 years ago at an AAGT conference, and we developed these together. So, is it playing? Okay, so we've got to just go to YouTube and you'll see a little bit more. How's your stomach?
It's good. I'm breathing, like, I'm calmer.
Yeah, are you still an 8?
No.
How stressed out do you feel now?
I don't know, 4? Not
4.
really stressed out.
Yeah, and I didn't even know. I mean, she's up here, but if somebody's stressed out, they don't even need to tell me what it is. You don't even need to say it. You don't have to know why. You don't have to have insight. You don't have to do anything. And it's not just a distraction. So the next time you get up in front of a group, guess what's going to happen? You're not going to go up to an 8. Because your brain goes into its memory networks to decide to do what to do the next time. So you're altering your nervous system around specific situations in real time. Do you need help, Rachel? Okay. Okay. All right. Hold on one second.
I need my TouchPoints back.
One second. Here. Okay, so I think, so it's on here, but it's not showing up.
Other than that,
Let me just refresh it.
I don't know if she's worried she's going to get in trouble.
Huh.
She's very, like,
Why did it do that?
it did it. She doesn't want to,
Okay, well, I clicked it back, so.
so she doesn't want to get in trouble. So she,
Okay, let me minimize this.
anyway, that's not the
Minimize that.
Just get you a minute.
Okay, dang it.
I quite really like that. Just from the way I, you know, grew up.
Pick up his anxiety, whatever he's,
Which one are we in?
because I can't fix it.
This is one right here.
Okay, let me go into,
And he's so when my oldest
Yeah.
son was in first grade.
Dang it.
Okay, go back to the
And slideshow.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, and then we'll go back to it.
There we go.
Okay, here we go.
Stay with me though to figure out.
Okay.
I didn't care for the house.
Okay.
I saw it firsthand.
Okay.
So,
How you doing?
Good.
Good? Okay, and there's a residual. So you're gonna, okay, someone else can come up after the video because it's not that loud, but.
When my oldest son was in first grade, he has a condition called hyperacusis, where loud sounds really take his nervous system into fight or flight. And I had to pull him from assemblies. He couldn't tolerate the lunchroom. And I actually sent him into school with prototypes on just because I thought it might help his anxiety about the situation. But it turns out he could regulate. He never even went into fight or flight, and he could tolerate lunch, and I didn't have to pull him from assemblies anymore. This technology can help with stress. It actually is helping with sensory integration in children. And that led to people in the autism community picking this up and now saying, this is amazing, now I can take my child to Disneyland. Usually when someone is autistic and they're actually in situations that other individuals can handle, the lights are too bright, the sounds are too loud, they're in nervous system dysregulation the entire time, they can't tolerate it. The TouchPoint seems to help them tolerate it.
Okay, go back. Yeah. Okay, I'll let you full and I'll help you. Does anybody else want to try these? Yeah? Okay. All right, can you think of something stressful? You don't have to tell me what it is. Yeah, it's easy, right? The only people I can't stress out, and I'm not kidding, are people that actually meditate every single day. But a lot of people can't even go into a meditative state, but these are training wheels for it. So if you've ever tried to meditate but it's frustrating, you use these and then you can actually get into that state. Okay, so how stressful is that thing 0 to 10? Ooh, it's a big one.
9.
9, and where do you feel it in your body right now?
Little bit here.
Okay.
Like make me feel dizzy.
Dizzy? Okay,
Here.
dizzy and right here, and that's intense. Like, is that
Yeah.
like a 9 too?
Right.
Okay, great. Hold these. Okay, and what's your name?
Susan.
Susan. Okay, so Susan's not even going to think about it, okay? Because again, you don't need to talk about it, you don't need to think about it. But if it's activating nervous system dysregulation and we deactivate that dysregulation, then the next time you think about it, it's not as stressful. And because you've just gone into the calm nervous system, then things feel better. Now, 9s are kind of, she's already in fight or flight. So the average statistics of thousands of users from our app data on these, because these, by the way, there's thousands of people around the world that have these already, okay? And we have their app data when they enter in those stress numbers. It goes down to a little less than an 8 to a 2.5 in 30 seconds. So there's a 71% stress reduction in 30 seconds. But when someone's a 9 or a 10, it takes a little longer. They're fully into fight or flight. So how is that feeling here and here now?
Little bit better.
Little bit better? Yeah.
Because I feel the impulse like come back and forth here.
Mm-hmm.
So do I have to feel it in order to calm myself down, or?
You have to, your body has to feel it, but your brain doesn't have to be processing it consciously. So
I don't need to focus on.
you don't need to focus on it. And that's the brilliant thing. So if you're at work and you're, doing something stressful, you can just turn them on and you tune it out. It's like white noise. Okay, so you attune to it at first, but then you stop paying attention to it after a while. And it just becomes like white noise. So you can just have them on, and they do buzz a little bit. They're 20% quieter than an iPhone, but they do buzz. So when people take the SATs with them on, because guess what? Test anxiety is a thing, right? That's the quickest thing that's going to tank someone's performance in a testing situation is anxiety. And so they actually wear them in their socks. And so they don't need to be touching skin, but your body has to be able to sense the vibration. But even if they're in thick clothing, it'll be able to sense the vibration. So how is that feeling now, here and here? Did it work its way down more?
Yes, here I feel nothing here now.
Okay, good.
But still a little bit here.
Still a little bit there. Try to get as stressed out as possible as you can about that thing. Now, she went right into a 9, and this is what happens. Your brain is quick, and it's not conscious. You ever have a stomach ache and you don't know why? You ever go panic and you don't know why? And this is why talk therapy is hard. Because you're saying, why are you panicking? What were you thinking of? And people are like, I don't know. I just went into all this dysregulation. There may not be a thought attached to it before your body has nervous system reactivity. But now, immediately when she had that thought, she went to a 9. And so now have that thought again and see how stressed out you can get. And what number that is, 0 to 10.
Maybe 7.
7, okay. And remember I said, like hers was an 8 and it went down a little bit faster. It's working itself down. So if you keep holding those, and I'll just have you sit down with them, and I'll check back in with you in a little bit.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So if we buy those for kids, can they wear it all day long, like activate all day long, or they should be turned on and off? They cannot be on all the time.
Yeah, so the question is can you just wear them all the time? Kids with autism usually have them on all day at school. And our original versions, the batteries last about 3 hours. The new basic versions, they don't require an app, and the battery will last about 6 hours. So you can almost get through a full day of school with just one set, and they're a little less expensive. So parents who want to rotate them out and have them on all the time, if their kids are they're autistic or very, very, very anxious, the basics have a little bit of longer battery life. Okay, so go ahead and have a seat. And if I had clips, she could clip them on. They actually come with clips too. But for now, just keep them in your hands and I'll explain what's happening. So this is another picture we can get from the EEGs. And this is a 38-year-old CEO. And this is his excess beta activity. So too much high frequency activity in his brain. And this is after 30 seconds of TouchPoint. That's how much that goes. And beta is associated with some anxiety. So when I look at your kids' brains, guess what? High beta. The ones who are kind of like can't get them out of bed in the morning and they just don't care and they're kind of a little amotivated, they have probably a little more predominantly slow wave activity. But a lot of the gifted kids are like your high beta kids, and this is going to reduce that activity. And then it's like they emerge from that, you know. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay. And here's some research on actually using bilateral stim. So it wasn't my idea to actually use this. Okay, that was already being done in therapy. And there's research like near-infrared spectroscopy studies that show that there's actually real effects and there's biological effects of using bilateral stimulation. Okay, here's some more. I won't go into it because I'm running low on time. Go ahead, Rachel. We'll skip this. Sorry, this is the nerdy geeky stuff. Okay, and when I first started trying to figure out what this does in the brain, okay, I consulted with Joel Lubar, and he's the father of neurofeedback. He's the one that figured out in the 1970s that neurofeedback could be used to fix ADHD, okay? And now the American Pediatric Association puts neurofeedback in the same category as medication for treating ADHD. So I called Joel and I was like, hey, I want you to look at 2 EEGs and I want you to tell me what's going on so I make sure I understand this. So he goes, well, you know, what did you do? And I'm like, I'm not going to tell you. I just want you to tell me what's going on. And this is what Dr. Lubar said. I'm seeing significant effects here, an overall lowering of the amplitude of the EEG, reduction in fast wave activity. Oh my gosh. He said, oh my God. I didn't put that in the quote. Look at the right insula. Whatever you did, I want it. And that's what he said. And this little spike right here in 13R is our key, you guys, in the salience network. That's delta activity. And this is actually making your brain make a different decision about the stress response. And I'm telling you, it's a miracle. Okay.
Wait, what?
Go ahead.
But there was the same.
Go back. Okay. So.
This one.
Uh-huh.
See where the green on the left-hand side
Yeah.
goes out? Is that not the same?
That's not the same Brodmann area. These are all distinct areas in the brain.
Oh.
And so some things it's changing and some things it's not. So when we look at, we actually looked at this statistically. There were thousands and thousands of variables to look at what statistical differences are between these two. And this was the most statistical one, but there were also some things in the prefrontal cortex, the default network, anterior cingulate, and a lot of other areas. But my particular research interest is actually in the right insula, because the right insula is actually sensory integration. It's also really important in addiction. And guess what? When you're stressed out, what are you going to do? Chocolate, wine, whatever. Use TouchPoints, he said. Oh. High five, dude. You get a gold star. I promise, I'm not paying them. I swear, I'm going to have to now, okay? But exactly.
That was my next question.
Exactly.
So is that imprinting on the brain, on the memory then? So that
Well,
next time?
So this is brainwave activity. So what gets imprinted on the memory is whenever you have, let's say I love hiking, and I go hiking, and it's my thing, and I go hiking and I see a rattlesnake. I'm more likely to not go hiking the next day and to avoid that because I went into fight or flight the last time, okay? But let's say I think about that now with TouchPoints on, that thing, going hiking and seeing the rattlesnake, and my nervous system doesn't keep reacting. I'm not going to avoid hiking anymore because I had a different nervous system activation. Your brain does go into its memory networks to say, hey, what happened last time? Hey, and that's why when people have negative experiences, they start to develop phobias or avoidance patterns. And by the way, most of your behavior is not under your conscious control. It's not. You actually are a ball of reactivity of whatever's happened to you in the past, and you don't even know it. Because when I do EMDR and we clear out some of those memory networks, all kinds of different behaviors change that we didn't even know were associated with one another. It's really, really cool. Okay, but your memory networks are incredibly powerful in dictating what you do or don't do. And if you don't believe me, tell me why you're a little overweight, or you're a little underweight, or you didn't exercise this morning, or you said the wrong thing. It's because a lot of our behavior is not under our conscious control. You can get it more in your conscious control if you're in parasympathetic activation, because when you're calm, you're thinking and you're more empathic and you're more connected. So we're doing some really cool studies. Our next wave of, right now we're looking at semi-pro athletic performance and cortisol levels, public speaking, ADHD. It actually lowers the hyperactive movement in kids with ADHD and helps them focus, and there's some reasons why that might be. And we've got some studies with autistic kids and a bunch of other ones I won't go into. But our next wave is empathy. Because when you have these on and you're not all over the place and you're not angry or wanting to craving something that you know you're trying actively not to do, okay, you're actually more empathic. Yes.
Can you do, like, if you're on ADHD, anti-anxiety medicine, have you seen patients come off of that by using the, like, you know what I mean? Like, I know there's a trend to come off that stuff.
Sure.
Like, to come off medication to do.
Sure. So my mom has a phobia of flying, and she would take, I don't know what, some kind of Xanax or something like that, and now she just brings her TouchPoints. And she did that 4 or 5 times, and now she doesn't even need them. Yeah, yeah.
Coming down, I know there's.
All those medications do is they yeah, and one of the great medications for kids with autism are beta blockers. All that does is reduce the heart rate so it's not going into pounding and sympathetic activation. These are physiological issues. They're not, and yes, so the answer is yes. Also, sleeping pills, there's a lot of people who you just can't get those thoughts to stop. And anxious kids sometimes spend up to an hour and a half a night trying to go to sleep. Okay, so you think they're asleep and they're not. Okay, you put TouchPoints on, they ease into sleep because their nervous systems are calm enough. And if you can get your nervous system calm enough on its own, you don't have to take Ambien to do it.
Yeah, he was saying downstairs about putting them in your socks. He said that, you
Uh-huh.
put them in your socks and maybe you have to go take them off. But,
Right.
Kids fall asleep with them in your socks.
Right, right. Okay, so I'm going to move on now. How are we doing, by the way? I know it's getting late. I don't even know what time it is. Okay, we're almost good. We're almost done. We've got 6. All right. Every child is gifted. You're no different from anybody. Please don't say that to your gifted kids. They have invisible differences, okay? But they are differences. And not every child is gifted, just like not every child is tall. Okay, giftedness, although there are some facets that are not measurable, the definition really is intelligence that is about 2 or more standard deviations away from the norm. It is very much a difference. Your kids are outliers. They're in the minority. It's best to embrace that and actually be productive in how you're talking to them about that instead of trying to convince them that they're the same, because invisible differences, when they're not dealt with appropriately, can be really difficult. How are you feeling, by the way? Much better. How stressed out can you get about that thing now?
Actually, if you ask me, it's almost gone.
It was almost gone, and then I asked you, and did I spike it back up a little bit? A little bit. Okay, we'll just keep those on. And if anybody wants to, feel free to go up and take them from her, and you can try them out. Okay, so sorry, Pollyanna, not every kid is gifted. Okay, next one. You have to show your work. Did anybody come up with this, have this problem, where your kids totally mastered something, and the teacher's like, I'm sorry, you get an F because you didn't show your work? Or, how did you come up with this answer? And they're like, this is part of the advantage of these long-range connections. They don't freaking know how they came up with the answer. Sometimes they do, but you're asking them sometimes to unbake a cake. And when you're talking to teachers, I know it's hard because, unfortunately, teachers are wonderful, but a lot of them haven't been trained on giftedness and they don't understand, okay? But you cannot unbake a cake. I cannot surgically extract the salt, okay? And so it's really frustrating for gifted kids to have to go back. I have this problem with memory where someone's like, well, do you remember when this and this? What happened then? And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what's already integrated. That's actually one of the great things about my brain is it integrates things like that. So I only have to read something once and it's already like embedded, and then I can't pull it back out, right? And so if your kids have this issue, please understand, if you are somebody that's organized, structured, and it's easy for you to unbake a cake, it might not be easy for your kids. And if they've mastered something, you can tell their teachers, hey, I know once they know all the definitions, they're supposed to write it 5 times, but could you have my kid do something else maybe that doesn't tax you? Please keep in mind, by the way, that these teachers are so taxed. They have to deal with emails from parents and all of these regulations, and they change the curriculum all the time and all of these things. So just make sure when you're trying to advocate for your gifted child, if they're not being serviced correctly, be mindful of the teachers and how much they're managing on a daily basis. And there's probably no like perfect solution for your child if they're an outlier, okay? Stop asking questions, okay? Alexa's my friend, okay?
We have 3.
You have 3 Alexas? You know what? Yeah. Hey, you got to do what you got to do, because Alexa's my friend. There are good parenting strategies out here, okay? Your kids are going to drive you nuts with all those questions. Why not have a robot with Asperger's answer all of their questions, okay? And I say Asperger's because if you don't ask her very precisely, she cannot compute, okay? And here's what I tell people too. If you have a child with Asperger's, talk to your child the way you ask Alexa questions. They will understand you much better. Or you're like crying back there in the corner, right? Is this, you feel my pain, right? My redhead that you saw in that video, he's like, Mom, Alexa's so dumb. She didn't know, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, you have to ask her this way. So I had to actually do Alexa training. And I used TouchPoints for that too, because you would actually get frustrated with her that she didn't know everything, right? And so, right, I know, it's a little bit frustrating, totally. Yeah, so anyway.
She actually answers when you ask her where she is.
Yeah.
She
and
says she's here and her head is in the clouds.
Did you, yes, she said her head is in the cloud. And do you ever ask her, my kid just asked her the other day, what are you? And she's like, I like to think of myself kind of like Andromeda. Like she actually has a sense of humor if you play around with it. But use technology, buy extra data so you can put stuff in your phone when you're not at home. Just your kids are going to be insatiable and curious, and really foster that. And if you get frustrated, put your TouchPoints on and it'll go away. Okay, number 9. Okay, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. Kid, Mom, I'm afraid of the dark. You're fine. Nothing's going on. Go to bed. Okay? Don't be dismissive when your kids are nervous. Okay? Your job, your first job is if your kid is in nervous system dysregulation, is to get them regulating better. That is your first job. It's not to get dysregulated yourself because you're upset that they're dysregulated. You are the emotional container. Okay? Right? Don't you throw your own tantrums. And I have something for you if you do that. Okay? If their nervous system, and it doesn't have to make sense, by the way. Your fears don't make sense, and your kids' fears may not make sense either, okay? Stop trying to make sense of it and stop trying to logic them out of it. Sometimes that works if they're not in fight or flight. Like my son was afraid, he heard a noise the other night, and I've got a little mini golden doodle. She's like this fluff ball, and she thinks she's a pit bull. So I'm like, hey, bud, you know what? He wasn't in fight or flight, so I said, hey, look, you know how if somebody's really at the door, Scout will bark and she won't stop? Yeah, she's our early warning system. So your brain is trying to be the early warning system, but we already have an early warning system. So if you hear a sound and it's like really a person or a threat or something, Scout's gonna totally bark and she'll let us know so you don't have to sweat it. And he's like, okay, that made sense to him. If he was in fight or flight, what I would have done is I would have given him the TouchPoints and then I would have talked to him about it. Because in fight or flight, are you listening? No. With your partners, by the way, no, you're not listening if one of you is in fight or flight. And that's the first rule of couples therapy, is if you're with a partner and one of you is in fight or flight, cut it out. Go self-soothe and then come back and have the conversation. And part of why couples therapy works is because no one's in fight or flight when they go in. And if they are, it's just a disaster anyway, which is why we put TouchPoints on both people and then we start to do work. Yes? If you don't have TouchPoints.
What would be an appropriate thing to try to get your child, calm down without just saying, calm down?
Yeah. So usually it's a physiological distraction. You can have a calming basket with different things, and you put it on your child. So my kids now, I'll say my redhead's feisty, right? And if he starts getting upset, I'm like, you can do TouchPoints or you can calm down by yourself. And he'll go, I'll calm down on my own. And then he goes and does it. Okay, you can have things too. You can have balls and you can let them go out and jump on a trampoline. You can have them do that. You can have them do jumping jacks if they want. But the problem is when they're in fight or flight, getting them to actually make a choice to do something is not happening unless there's something that's really fast that's going to work. And if they know that they don't have a choice, like my kids, I'm like, this or you got to figure it out. And they're like, okay. And if they know if they can't go calm down on their own, then they just do the touch points and they work. But if you don't have those, you can just try things, but you have to sometimes habituate that, and it's really hard if your kid goes right to a 10 really fast, okay? And sometimes sometimes the trick is to not make it worse, right? Just be like, hey man, you're not allowed to yell at me, I'm out. And then you go away and then they'll calm down, right? Because how many times have you been like with your partner or somebody, you keep talking about it, whatever, ruminating about it, and you just stay worked up. But if you had to go do the dishes or do something else, your nervous system would go back into regulation. But it kind of depends on the kid and how dysregulated they are. Okay, next one. Why did you do that? Okay, this is our last one. Mom, do you want me to lie? That's what my son said to me one time. Our attributions about why we do stuff are wrong most of the time. Okay? And my question to you is when you're asking your kid a question, if you ask them why, you're asking for them to get defensive. Okay? Even if it's something they didn't do wrong. Oh, you did that, you wrote that sentence. Why did you do that? That means that they have to get defensive and explain themselves. So if you're going to use a why question, I want you to ask yourself, if you had the answer, how would that be helpful to you? Okay? Because usually the answer to why questions aren't helpful at all. And a lot of times they don't know why they did things. And you don't know why you did things either. Do you know why you wore that dress today versus everything else? I mean, it's cute, but...
I know why I do everything.
You know why you do everything. Okay. Well, your kids may not.
Right.
But
and I thought I could teach him that, but that's not working.
Very true.
Right.
I do not know what she...
yeah. Yeah. And you know
But
what?
I do know why I do everything.
Okay, and that's fine, but if he doesn't and you have the answer, let's say he did know and he gave you the answer, how would that help?
Because it helps me draw a logical path to why or why not he shouldn't and what he should do.
Oh my gosh, there's so many whys and shoulds in that sentence. I just like my head's like spinning around. Like give your mom the where are the touch points?
In my hand. And I'm sorry to be so selfish. Kind of.
This is awesome. Okay. Love it. All right. Next slide. Okay. Okay. Do you guys want to know about how neurofeedback works? Real quick? Okay. So neurofeedback is operant conditioning. And just like if you ever teach a dog how to shake their paw, they don't know what you're doing, by the way. I know your dogs are smart. They might be gifted dogs, and there's probably another conference for that. But they don't know what you're doing. All you're doing is you're manipulating their behavior and training them with dopamine that pairs up with an EEG response. So if they move their paw and you go click and the click is associated with something, they get a little release of dopamine. So we can do that with your brain and your kid's brain, and that's how we get stability. If you were coming to my office and I was in the car with you and I said, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but as soon as you move your hand in the right direction, if it's the right turn that's going to save you 5 minutes on the drive, I'll go ding. So you do this and I go ding, and you're like, ooh, good, right turn, and then you do it. And eventually, I map out a path, and then once you know that path, you're going to take that because it's more efficient. Your brain is like that. It doesn't regulate some things on its own, okay? But if we condition it to do that, it's more efficient so it stays regulated. It's beautiful. It's not like muscle. Wouldn't it be great if we could all go to CrossFit and just be obsessive for like 1 week, and then we just look like that, and that's just what happens? But muscle is metabolically expensive, and your body is always after homeostasis. So what does it do with muscle as soon as you're done using it? Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Okay? That's why you got to keep going to the gym if you want to keep your muscle mass up. Okay? Your brain is the opposite. Once we regulate it and make it the way that we want, okay? And by the way, it's not changing your kids' personalities. It's not changing who they are. It's non-invasive. We're just getting their electrical activity to be better, and that actually has a good effect. Then it stays there. It stays more efficient. Okay, next slide. Oh, and I don't have other pictures of the neurofeedback because we already talked about that. So does anybody have questions about the neurofeedback and how it works? No? Okay, so it's not invasive. Now, there are invasive things we can do, by the way. Okay, so there's transcranial direct current stimulation. It's not like ECT, don't worry. We're not giving anybody lobotomies or anything. But we can prime the brain. So let's say you're in the car and you don't make enough movement for me to tell you which way to go. We can actually stimulate the brain to make a little bit of movement, and then we can reinforce it. And that's the invasive stuff with direct cranial stimulation, alternating stimulation, and things like that. And you can do that before neurofeedback. Please, if you do neurofeedback, go to a neuropsychologist. Okay, don't go to somebody that just bought some equipment and wanted another way to make money that doesn't know anything about the brain, okay? Because it can do some harm in the short term. Not usually long-term harm, by the way, though. But the harm is wasting your time and your money if it's not done right. We do neurofeedback. Dr. Jason Baker, brilliant neuropsychologist in Phoenix that does neurofeedback. Usually he's who I refer to if we're too busy to accommodate people. But since we just expanded, we're pretty good with that. Okay, so let's talk about Sir Roger Bannister because I love him. Does anybody know who that is? You probably read the slide 5 times already while I was talking, so you know. Okay. Sir Roger Bannister was a neurologist, and he just like trained to be a runner on his lunch hour, right? Because gifted people like to multitask and do a lot of things and everything. And he didn't even care that he ran the 4-minute mile because he really, really was being into being a neurologist. And he actually figured out, because he had to be efficient, if I do fartlek, these are like intervals, I can actually speed train much faster than all of these programs that people are telling us. And I love this because this is a paradigm shift, right? People are saying this can't be done. And in his breaks, he's figuring out how to do something amazing just as a side thing. Okay, next slide. So he actually ran the 4-minute mile in 1952, and that was actually yoked with climbing Mount Everest, which people also thought couldn't be done. So since then, 4,100 people have climbed Everest, and by 2014, 1,300 people have run a sub-4-minute mile. And this is what he says. No one can say, you must not run faster than this or jump higher than that. The human spirit is indomitable. Okay, so I'm asking you to consider some paradigm shifts here today, okay? That lowering your stress response or your children's stress response can be easier than you thought, okay? And there he is, by the way. I'm here to tell you that our technology is better than you thought, okay? And when it's applied correctly, there can be a lot of improvements. And therapies like EMDR versus talk therapy or play therapy and other things are really, really cutting edge. And so if you talk to somebody and they tell you that your child is gifted and they're anxious, so you just have to manage and cope with their anxiety, I don't want you to believe them. Okay, I want you to understand that at every point in our human existence, there are milestones and thresholds that can be transcended that people don't believe in. And I think you've just seen some evidence of some here today. So don't buy into the fact that mental health diagnoses are permanent. Okay? Coping and managing shouldn't be your goal. Okay? Some things, by the way, are permanent. We can't fix autism. Okay? And we can't fix everything. But there's a lot that we can fix that because people are saying Mount Everest can't be climbed, the 4-minute mile can't be run, all of those things currently, I just want you to pay attention and know that sometimes our only limitation is how we're thinking about things. Okay? And then I want you to strive for this, because you all have your own gifted intensities and everything like that. And sometimes we can be the helicopter parents, or like me in the chess game, you can be the, the tiger parent. But what is this? This is the happy medium. So, as you go about your day, I would like you to remember this friendly face, and I would like you to be the happy medium, and just know that your gifted children are really a gift to this world. They're going to be the ones that change the world in the future. They're going to be the ones that make the discoveries if we foster it correctly. And I know you have an uphill battle with the education system and the political system and your own internal system and all of those things. But I hope you leave today with a sense of hope and some ideas on how your lives can be better and how your parenting job can be made easier. We've got a lot of things outside for you to pick up, including coupons for TouchPoints, information on Serin Center. I will stay and talk with you if you would like for about 3 minutes a person if you want. And I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming here today and for loving your children enough to try to know more. Thank you.